Dr. Jason Duque is a teaching professor in the Gevirtz School's Department of Education and Teacher Ed program. His research focuses on the social relations between adults, children, and various combinations of the two, and he conceives of social relations as a context for learning and growing. Dr. Duque has a PhD in education from Stanford and both a bilingual teaching credential and an administrative service credential. Before joining the Gevirtz School in 2001, Dr. Duque worked as a bilingual teacher in Carpinteria and Long Beach, and as a researcher for the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Also, aside from all the courses he teaches at UCSB, Dr. Duque is also one of the lead researchers in the California Teacher Education Research and Improvement Network, which is the landmark response of 9 UC campuses to improve the quality and efficiency of California's educator preparation system. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Duque. Jason, why don't you take us for a whirl?
Thanks. Yeah, what an honor to be here. Here we are. Let me start my video. Let me just talk a little bit. It doesn't keep us from getting started. Thank you all very much for coming. I have to tell you, I teach large numbers of undergrad students as well as smaller groups of, oh, there we are, smaller groups of doctoral students and master's students. And I find myself feeling a little intimidated because the expertise in this group is a different kind of expertise. And I feel, frankly, more like a colleague than I do an expert. I will try to leverage whatever expertise I can manage, but I want you to know that I'm speaking to you largely as a friend and colleague, or maybe an acquaintance and colleague, and at some point a friend and colleague. I'm going to try to share my screen so I can get into the slideshow. It'll help us stay organized. John, I'm going to ask you to be my kind of touchstone, and if I ask questions about how things are going, I hope I can hear you do that. So, John, can you see? Let me see here. Can you see my screen now, John, or anybody? Can you see me?
I can see your screen, and I can.
How about when I do this? Can you see my screen now?
I can see your screen now.
Does it look like a regular presentation, or does it have a sidebar on it with a bunch of stuff?
It looks like a regular presentation.
Wow, that's amazing how technology works. Thanks, everybody, as I said, for coming. John's already given an introduction. I find myself not listening super closely because I'm never sure how to respond, but I did hear a couple things that rang true, not just in my own biography, but also about the things I care about, in particular, the ways that social relations get built and how they're a context for learning and becoming. So that's going to be a pretty big part, a foundational part of what I'm going to talk to you today about. So John, I'm listening for your voice. John, can you see my amazing family?
I can see your amazing family.
I should just stay on this slide for the next little bit. It'll make me feel reassured, etc. It makes me happy. I'm a researcher. I'm an educator. I'm also a parent. I'm also a partner in parenting. The things I'm going to talk through today are very much grounded in my own research, especially the research of others. And it's also, by and large, tested in the real world. I want to be careful in general to not make recommendations unless I have some idea about them working in the real world. Now, I'm not against experimental research. It's not what that's about, or evidence-based or research-based research. But too often, we find the real test is whether or not it works in practice. So the things I'm going to talk to you today about are some ideas that have helped me as a parent and as a partner, and also as a researcher and a teacher. And yes, I think that's all I want to say about that. I will also say that there's a risk in this, and this photo captures that risk. There's a risk that I make everything, or that it comes off as if everything I'm describing, or even some tips and tricks, come off as sure things or overly optimistic. It's the sort of everybody's lives look wonderful on Facebook. And I look at this picture and I see my amazing children and my amazing partner, and we look amazingly happy, and they look beautiful. It's not always like this. This is at its best. Likewise, some of the things I'll talk to you about today are, I'm only going to talk about the good stuff, or the times when it's good, which means I'm not going to be talking about the times when things don't work. And that means that I'm going to be painting an incomplete picture. So please know, nothing works all the time. And frankly, I'm never, we can never be entirely sure what we mean by works anyway. That's an introduction that wasn't included in John's introduction. If I were as a university professor, the next thing I'd say was make sure you have some pen and paper. And the reason for that in this case, I know that there are a few people online who've worked with me before or who've been in talks that I've given before. You're not going to see a bunch of text on the screen. And when we have you give you an opportunity to share or to receive some of these slides later, what you're not going to see is a bunch of text that I'm reading. So if the best way to proceed through any of my presentations is generally with a pen and paper or a pencil and paper in hand, so you can take notes, but also can keep track of questions that can come up later. I'm going to start out with a few ideas that are going to orient and guide us today. I want to move through these relatively quickly, which means that I'm not going to get in the kind of depth that I would love, or even have the conversations that I'd love to have with you. First and foremost, look, you're not alone. Please, from this point forward, I hope you consider me a colleague. If you're an educational professional, me too. If you are a parent, me too. If you're a grandparent, not yet. If you're a caregiver, if you're a student, I actually think of myself as a student by and large, but you are not alone. You're also especially not alone in the contemporary situation or the current situation with the COVID-19 crisis. A lot of us are grappling with feeling alone. I have many conversations with undergrad and graduate students, as well as friends who are feeling isolated. And I know that some of us can see a horizon there. Some of us are having a harder time seeing that horizon. I just want to reassure you, you're not alone. When things are tough, you're not the only one for whom they're tough. When you are longing for companionship, there are other people longing for companionship. When you just can't figure things out, there's a bunch of people who just can't figure things out. Another initial idea or orienting idea, and this is really important to all my work, not just today, but all my work. This is not tailored to the current situation. And that's the conviction that kids make sense. What does that mean in particular? It's really an alternative to thinking about what kids can't do or are not doing and trying to fix what's broken. It's an initial position that assumes that whatever kids are doing, whether or not we like it, whether or not it's what we hope for them, what kids are doing is reasonable. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it okay, but it means that it's reasonable. And when your kid is excited, that's reasonable. When your kid is moving through stuff and really engaged, that's a reasonable response to some set of circumstances. And likewise, when your child has a complete meltdown at any age, and this is teenagers or 8-year-olds, thinking about that as a reasonable response to the environment that they're living in. Furthermore, their environment that they're living in may or may not be the environment that we're living in, even if we're in the same place with the same people. We experience the world differently, and what kids do makes sense. In addition, an initial position for this, and I'll guide us through, is the relationships are more important than schoolwork. It's the relationships your child is in, as well as the relationships that your child will learn how to build and to seek. Those kinds of relationships, which are always already a context for learning and becoming, those are more important than the schoolwork your child is doing or not doing, as the case may be. So as an initial position, relationships are more important than schoolwork. I want to talk, there's about 3 more, so hang in there. I want to talk about putting kind of schooling in its place. Schooling is essential. We know that schooling, not only does schooling provide a daycare function that many of us miss, but schooling gives our children the opportunity to learn things that we can't teach them directly or easily. But schooling is just one way of organizing educational environments. There are many, many other kinds of educational environments and other educational institutions. Some of us who are churchgoers, church or our churches can be educational environments. Sports teams can be educational environments. Frankly, the mass media can also be an educational environment in as much as it's trying to change what we and our children think or want or believe or do. Video games are an educational environment. Boy, would I love to share you some of the research on that. and how video game designers have cracked the code for thinking about motivation and learning. But excuse me, but learning itself is really a much bigger. One of the things I want to say here is that what we've been doing is not, I would not call this online learning. I want to be really clear. I want to look ahead and think about learning as a concern of all of us, online learning as a way to organize for our children's learning. But what we've been doing so far is emergency remote schooling or emergency remote teaching. So let's learn from what we've had to figure out, but let's move forward thinking about learning. So learning is much bigger than schooling. Two more things, only two more. The educator is not an expert, or let me say it a little bit differently. The educator may be an expert, but just because you're an expert, you're not an expert. Let me start that over. The educator may be an expert. Just because you're not an expert doesn't mean you can't be an educator, and we're going to get into that in some detail later. And finally, habits are more important than the big stuff. A lot of times, especially when we're in these moments of real urgency and trying to figure things out, we worry, what we want really is some big solution, some big thing we can do that reorganizes everything. That's perfectly reasonable to wish for. We make sense just like kids do. But if we want to build something that is sustaining and that leads to real change, it's more effective, frankly. And there's plenty of research on this too, about changing our habits or developing the habits that we want that will sustain our work toward whatever it is that we want. I'm going to come back, especially these last four are going to be a big part of what I continue to talk about today. Relationships, bigger and more important and more lasting than schoolwork. Learning is much bigger than schooling. Educators don't need to be experts, and habits is more important than the big stuff. A few things all of us can do. So the next couple of things, few things I'm going to say are looking ahead to some really specific recommendations that are hopefully customized in a little bit for some of the situations you might find yourselves in. But there are a few things all of us can do. First, we can all begin to think and work small. This goes with the habits are better than big stuff, or are bigger than big stuff, more important than the big stuff. But in this case, what I mean is, if we're looking to make things better for ourselves, but in particular, I'm assuming if you're here, better for our children as well as ourselves, it's important to start thinking and working small. Sometimes those small things are habits or routines. Other times small just means dealing with the here and now, not with something much larger, some larger situation. The second thing is, let me get a quick drink. Excuse me. The second thing we can all do, no matter what our situation is, think about being with. And being with is different than talking to. I'm making a distinction here, and I find myself falling into the trap of passing my children in the hallway, passing my partner in the hallway, even at work, passing my colleagues in the hallway, and failing to take advantage of the small moments in time where we can actually be with. And you'll see here, what can we all do? Well, we can be with the people who are around us. I have a doctoral student who's doing some marvelous work on we spaces, figuring out how to build a we space. One of the easiest ways to begin doing that is to move our bodies into a position that we're with the people that we're with. What that can mean is moving our eyes to be at roughly the same level, but most significantly, and perhaps most consequentially, putting our bodies into positions with our children and our partners, but our children, where we're not always facing our children, but where we can move shoulder to shoulder with our children, or even let our children look over our shoulder, and to have us look over our children's shoulder. I think a lot about this. It's well within reach. We can all move into shoulder to shoulder lives with our children, which is a way of being with in a way that is not the same as face to face. And finally, something we can all do is check in. So I'm going to check in with you now, and I'm going to ask you to go into either the Q&A, or if you have something that's not working, please go into the chat and let our facilitators know. So I'm checking in with you, but also recommending we can all check in. Sometimes we've raised the bar too high for ourselves, and what we imagine that we would do is somehow suddenly build these deep, lasting, social media worthy relationships with our kids and our partners and our people. And I think it's been quite clear to me in my own research that we don't always think of the times, the small moments we do have. And I'm going to talk more about this later, about the importance, excuse me, the importance of checking in. John, I'm going to check in with you and say, can you hear me okay still?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. There's a little bit of a worry. It's hot in my house, so I'm having to have fans on. So I'm hoping that's not causing too much disturbance. I'm going to reach over here and move this clock. I'm trying to keep an eye on. So let me go into how I said I was going to be thinking about customizing some of the recommendations to whatever our situations are. So let me talk about how I'm customizing it, and this should go pretty fast. There's two ways that I'm dividing up our situations, or two dimensions along which I want to describe our situations, differentiate our situations. One of them is low demand and high demand from school. What does this look like? I'll start with low demand. It's over on your left. Low demand, in its purest form, looks like summer with no camp, or summer with no childcare, or not with no childcare, summer with no school, and with no formal activities. Low demand is when there aren't a lot of requests or demands on our child's time, and I'm talking here about our kids. High demand would be where not only that there's a high demand on that time, but often that time is pretty structured. So in my own experience over the last several months, several weeks, gosh, it's months already, that looks like, regular Zoom meetings. It looks like, lots of assignments. It means being available for online lectures. I have a high schooler, I have a third grader. It looks real different in those situations, but I can feel when that demand is high, when my children are running around trying to find Wi-Fi, trying to make sure we don't have great Wi-Fi, so, excuse me, trying to find where the best Wi-Fi is and trying to get the work done because there's some kind of a deadline. I think you get the high demand and low demand. The other dimension along which I want to differentiate our situations is our own availability. What does high availability look like? High availability, let me go with low availability. I think this describes more of our situations. Maybe low availability is when we're either working because could be remote in the same house, but you're not really available. Could be working because you're at work. That seems like maybe it's around the corner. We have different perspectives on that. But low availability is you can be at home and still not be available, otherwise occupied. High availability is a way of thinking about how you as a parent, if you're a parent or a caregiver or a grandparent, where you are available, and also not just available for stretches of time, but maybe also just available on call. The highest availability would be available for longer stretches of time on an as needed basis. I'm not making a lot more distinctions than that, but that's the second dimension. So first, school demand, and second, family. It doesn't have to be parents. It could also be siblings, frankly, family availability. So this is the way it works out. We get 4 quadrants. I'm not going to explain these much more in much more detail, but I am going to ask you to think about what situation you find yourself in. Which of these best describes your current circumstances? So first question is, which of these best describes your current circumstances, but also which of these are you most worried about, whether or not it describes your current circumstances? So it may be the case that you're coming up on the end of the school year and you're most worried about the quadrant in the upper left corner where there's a low demand from school, in the lower left-hand corner where there's a low demand from school, but you're also maybe not available for your kids. So I want you to think both about what are you in and what are you most worried about. I want to be, if you were my university students, undergrad or grad, right about now, I'd have you take a piece of paper and I'd have you fold it like this. We call it the hamburger way, or this is what I talked about when I was teaching 5th grade and kindergarten. The hamburger way, right? This is a hamburger. This is a hamburger. This is a hot dog. In any case, hamburger way twice, and what you get is a piece of paper that's got 4 quadrants. So if you're the kind to take notes, that'd be an effective way to take notes. Again, I couldn't help it because I'm always thinking about my own students. So this is
compartirlo de esa
Would
manera.
you like me to launch the poll?
not quite yet. Let me get almost.
Jason,
Okay, so,
¿quieres que
yes.
empiece con la otra encuesta?
This one right back here. Oh, the 2 questions.
Las dos
I think that was
preguntas.
directed at me. And what I heard was.
Creo que eso se dirigía a mí.
Oh, what the question is. I'm hearing the Spanish translation now, so I don't know if that's intentional. I don't know if the question is directed at me or not. I'm happy to respond. Again, the two questions were, which situation are you in, and which situation do you feel like you're most worried about? Okay, so there's a few things that are not covered here, right? I want to be very clear. There's a lot of variability in our circumstances, including differences in age, right? We could have kids who are different ages with different needs. There is a way to describe low availability, which is that we're just outnumbered. There's also differences in technology access. There are differences in the special needs of our kids. There are differences in language and our own and others' availability to just understand each other because of differences in language. I am not talking about those today. I think what I'm still talking about and will be talking about is still relevant, but I'm not talking about those today. What I would like to do is, if this is something that's important to you, please let us know and we can begin to develop some thoughts around this. So John, this would be a good time to do the poll, and it looks like there will still be time to cover a couple of these as we go forward. So go ahead, John, if you don't mind. So these are, which of these do you think we should examine together? I'm ready to talk about any of these four. I reckon we'll probably get a chance to talk about two today. John's going to get that in here. It looks like few people have voted out of 43 people who are attending today, and we'll get going. Oh, high demand, low availability. Yeah, that's kind of what I reckoned. Oh, I can't wait to talk to you about some of these. If you're out there, please take a chance to vote, because this vote will determine what we do next. If you are familiar with the stories where you get to choose your own adventure, where you choose which story to follow, this is kind of like that. Looks like we can probably finish up sometime in the next 10 seconds or so, John. We've got about 3/4 of the people having cast their vote. High demand and low availability. It looks like quadrant number 4 is the one that's coming in. There we go. Perfect. So this is what we got. So we're going to start. Ooh, the rest of them are neck and neck. So if I had total control of the polls, I'd build a second poll, but we won't do that. Let's do 4, and let's see where we can go from there. We'll start with 4. John, you can go ahead and stop sharing that. 4, which is high demand. Sorry, 4 is high demand but low availability. Let me go down here. This is going to be. Frankly, I was hoping people would be willing and able to, are interested in talking about this. All right, here. So high demand. What's that mean? School's demanding a lot of you, but you're just not available to help. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple of things first. There are 4 strategies I want you to try. Now I want to be clear. These are not strategies that I'm not willing to guarantee that these will work, but I think they're worth trying. The first one I'm going to talk about is called Pomodoros and the Pomodoro technique. Some of you are familiar with this already. The time we have in school is organized by subject area only because there are so many kids in school, and this is about managing all the kids we have. Right? So you don't have that same burden. So rather than thinking about clocks, I want you to think about timers. What does that mean? To think about clocks is to say, for example, 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock is math, 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock is language arts, 10 o'clock to, maybe there's nutrition break, 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock is science, 11 o'clock to, I don't know, noon is social studies, you have lunch, and then maybe if there's time, you do music and art. That's a whole nother conversation about whether or not we like that prioritization. But in any case, our time in school is organized by clocks because it's a management issue. And I've seen over and over again recommendations to organize the days at home in the same way. I disagree wholeheartedly. And when I ran the possibility of this presentation by my own children, when I talked about, hey, this is what I've been thinking about, this is what I've been asked to present, all 3 of my kids, 8 years old, 12 years old, and 14 years old, all talked about this one thing, which is the Pomodoro method or the Pomodoro technique. Is how I'm going to talk about it. There's a beautiful history on this. There's lots of research on this. What it means is rather than being governed by a clock, you're governed by a timer. And rather than having your time organized by subject area, you're organizing your time by focus and not focus. So you're the conventional, most common way of organizing your time with the Pomodoro method is with a kitchen timer. This happens to be our kitchen timer on our kitchen table. That's my favorite kitchen timer that I was able to find. And we use it all the time, is you go 25 minutes of focus and then followed by 5 minutes of do what you like. Again, 25 minutes after that, and then 5 minutes. In a perfect world, or in an adult world, perhaps that goes, you cycle through that 4 times, 25 and 5, 25 and 5, 25 and 5, and then a 4th time, 25 and 5, and that's followed by a half-hour break. That break could be playing online, whatever your break is. I find it most useful if my break has nothing to do with whatever has required my focus. It could be searching for something that I was looking for on Amazon. It could be I had some question and I'm going on Google. It could also mean I'm going out and pulling a weed that's been bugging me all day, or I go grab a snack. The Pomodoro technique is about organizing your time, not by a clock, but by a timer, and not by subject area, but by focus. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second and what that looks like. So number 1 out of 4, the Pomodoro technique. Here's the second one. You have the Pomodoro technique. Number 2 is plan and check in. This is, my son's name is Zeke. Ezequiel Tomas is his name. We call him Zeke. This is Zeke's plan for, I don't remember what day this was. I don't think, it was sometime in the last week. Plan first. So you can see how we've planned it. We don't plan it by subject area, except until after we've designated some time for Pomodoros. Now, some of you are saying, gosh, 9:30, is that, I don't know if that's a late start or an early start for those of you who are here today. This was a relatively late start for us, but Zeke was very interested in building a Lego thing that he had been messing around with. So 9:30 to 11 is time, right? That's the time for maybe 2, maybe 3 Pomodoros, but at least 2. So you can see in the picture, there's 2 Pomodoros. And our idea here was math and English language arts. That's what you're going to start with. But if you finish that, you can always go down to social studies and other subjects. He's a 3rd grader. There's plenty of work to do. So plan. I'm not going to go into all of this, but you can see pretty high demand, right? And I wasn't going to be available today, not only because I was preparing for this talk, but I had 4 meetings and 1 brief little class I had to give. So planning, and then also checking in. So you'll see this begin repeating. Planning, using the Pomodoro technique, but then, which again is timers, not clocks, focus, not subject area. And then checking in, right? And at the end, you can see at the very end, check in with mom and dad. We've been going back and forth a little bit with Zeke, where he says he's done and he's not really done. And we can't quite tell if he doesn't know that he's done, but we're doing these regular check-ins. What's not here in the second part of this recommendation, planning and checking in, is the importance of checking in along the way. I mentioned that before, and I want to be clear. The checking in at the end doesn't substitute for checking in along the way. So what that means is I had a little break in between some things that I wasn't expecting around 12 o'clock. It was 12:15, and my son Zeke was supposed to be at lunch, and I was supposed to be done with his Zoom, and I went and I found him. I literally had 4 minutes. Hey, Zeke, hey, just wanted to check in. How's things going? Great. You said I finished the Zoom early. I said, did you start your lunch early? I started my lunch early. That's great. What'd you have? Just super, it's very quick. Remember, relationships are more important than schoolwork. We got to take advantage of the time we have. So planning and checking in. That's number 2. Number 3, putting people together. Gosh, I'm so glad you all picked quadrant number 4. Putting people together is, for me, a way to capture something I'll talk about, the 4th thing, which is delegate. A version of that. Putting people together means leaning in to the technology we have and that we're being asked to adopt, to put your child in contact with other kids to work on stuff. Now, this may seem self-evident, but it's not, as in practice, it's a little less obvious than we might imagine. In practice, putting people together often, even our kids resist this because they say, well, I have questions and I'm looking to the grown-up around for an answer. Putting people together means putting kids together and also putting your own kid together with perhaps siblings. If that doesn't work, doesn't always work for sure, even in the most easygoing of families, which mine's not always. Putting people together is about getting more than one person working on a problem at the same time. This first slide, this first image, I think is the conventional way we talk about putting people together. I put it first because it's the easiest one, right? Somebody else has already reached the top and we put the person who hasn't reached the top in contact with them so they can reach down and pull them up. The other image is the classic image of a kid helping another kid at a desk, do some kind of schoolwork. I actually think that is valuable and important, but it's narrow. And I want to think about another way of putting people together, which is getting people who maybe aren't or aren't at different levels to work on the same thing together. This isn't the same as helping. And I think we too often limit ourselves to thinking that what our kid needs is help. Sometimes what our kid needs is just other people. And if we're not available, it's worth trying out strategies and techniques to get our children in contact with other people who are also struggling with the same thing. Now, if you have a high school student, I do, if you have a high school student, your kid is probably already doing this. Whether or not you know about it, your child certainly knows how to do it. But with younger kids, they often need our support and they could use our support and also access to technology to get them in contact with other people. It also means getting together with parents and saying, look, can Zeke reach out to Isabella if he has a question? And just this morning, I got a text that said Isabella needs help, and I asked Zeke. I said, man, I got a bunch of things to do. You good? Are you available for a phone call? And he said, yes, I'm available for a phone call. So they had a phone call, and it turned out he didn't understand it either, but they worked it out together. So that's number 3, putting people together. And finally, delegate. Delegate. And I'm assuming that y'all have some that we can figure out how to use our technology to put some boundaries on what our kids are doing online. That's not what today is about. On the contrary, with that in mind, assuming we figure that out, I want to encourage you to lean in to your child's looking for ways of figuring things out that are available online. So delegate to Quizlet. Quizlet's a flashcard thing. Delegate to Brainly, which is a kind of, Brainly is a little sketchy because it's about giving answers to tests. Delegate to Khan Academy, my goodness. Delegate to YouTube. Delegate to Google above all else. I asked my undergrads earlier in the week, I had 90 undergrads in a Zoom meeting, and I asked them, what are the online resources they turn to when they're stuck on something? And they're not looking always for answers, but they're looking for how to understand something. And they go to Khan Academy or Google, and Google was far and away the winner. College students go online and say, how do I, or they say, type some concept in where they're going to get some instruction. I want you to feel comfortable delegating, and I want to encourage you to delegate the instructional responsibility to a lot of these other kinds of resources. Now, there is some concern that means that we're cheating. That's a whole nother lecture I might give. It would sound pretty lectury about cheating. I don't want you to worry about cheating right now. That's not how learning works. That's not how knowledge works. Cheating is a way to think about tests. Cheating is not a way to think about learning. And the degree to which we are oriented toward learning, I think we would do our children, our children, I can feel myself getting lectury, children a disservice if we leave it to them to learn things on their own when there's so many other resources. This is not how learning works. Learning is fed by our relationships with other people, whether or not those other people are more advanced than us. We can stand shoulder to shoulder with other people and figure things out together. So that is all for the high demand, low availability quadrant, right? Some 4 things to try and I will say that in my own life as a parent, this has been transformative, these 4.
Eso ha sido
Yeah.
transformativo.
De nuevo estoy escuchando el español. So I'm hearing
Se están
Spanish again. I want to make sure.
We're switching now.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please don't apologize. It's no problem. So that's that quadrant. There's so much more I want to say, but I will end that by saying that these have worked. No, whether or not they work, there are things that I do when I'm trying to figure this out, just like you are. Let me share another, let me go to another quadrant. It looked like either 1 or 2. Let me go a low demand, low availability, maybe quadrant 3. I feel like quadrant 1, which was low demand, from school, but high availability. I'm really excited about that. But that's the furthest from the topic of the talk, which is school at home. So, John, do you have a recommendation whether we should do quadrant 2 or quadrant 3? We can go with either one.
Jason, let me review the results here and see if I can.
Okay, cool. I'm kind of leaning toward number 2, if nobody has any objection.
Number 2 was the highest selected after number 4.
Ah, lucky me. Okay, so high demand, high availability. I'm going to go through this fast, and this will leave some time for Q&A. My section of today's webinar got started a little bit late, which we expected. I am going to take, it'll be around 30, 35 minutes, but I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. And for what it's worth, I am available to stay for a few minutes after 7 o'clock. High demand, high availability. We're going to be able to get through this one quick because the first one we already covered in the high demand, low availability. So what's high demand, high availability? High demand, high availability. School is demanding a lot of your time and energy and resources, or demanding a lot of your children. And you are at the same time available to help, right? So the first thing, it's a repeat, right? There are going to be 4 again, but the first one's a repeat. The Pomodoro technique, again and again, I wish there was some amazing research or sort of complicated conceptual work that I could throw at you that would explain it. There's some research on it. I will just tell you it works. The second one is to be a learner. So remember, we're talking about high demand from school and high availability. This allows me to go back and remind you of an idea that I said was a guiding idea for our time together today, and that is the educator doesn't need to be an expert. Some educators are experts, but you don't need to be an expert to be an educator. And when there's a high demand on school and you are available, I think the next obstacle to us is often that we feel like we can't be present for our children or help our children unless we are also an expert. I'm going to tell a very quick story here. By the way, please pay attention to the image. This image is parts unknown. This is the American West. I want to be clear. There were plenty of people who in the late mid 1800s, indigenous peoples who were well aware this was not unknown parts for them, but it was unknown to the map maker. And I think that captures the stance I think we should take, is that we don't have to be expert. Somebody is, and we can still enter some of this territory with our children. So what does it mean to be a learner? What I'm trying to, I said I was going to tell a story. My daughter comes to me, Lilia, she's a 14-year-old freshman in high school, and she comes to me and she says, man, Dad, is asking me questions about sine, cosine, and tangent. If you don't remember that, trust me, you're in the same boat I was in on the day that she asked me this. I did well in trigonometry, but she comes to me with this and says, can you help? And I didn't know how to help, and I happened to be available. All right, let me say this. I didn't know what to tell her to do, fortunately. So instead, what I did is I said, well, I don't know, I've done it, but I don't remember. So let's sit down. And what we did is we sat down together and we entered the territory of trigonometry together. I learned that trigonometry, the trig part of trigonometry, refers to triangles, which maybe somebody told me when I was in high school, but I don't remember. And I was a learner with my child. I still had some authority as a parent, but there was something really educationally effective. My daughter, I think, got sine, cosine, and tangent, those functions of trigonometry. But at the same time, our relationship also is such that it was deepened in a way that I can wax poetic about, but I have a hard time putting my finger on. In any case, be a learner. If you're available and your child has a high demand for school, learn alongside your child. You don't have to be an expert. So that's number 2. Number 3, ask real questions. What do I mean by real questions it goes along with being a learner. Okay, so be a learner. You got to do that. You got to take that stance first. And the third one is ask real questions and listen. What do I mean by real questions? I mean something really specific. There just really wasn't room on a single slide. Ask questions that you don't know the answer to. We recognize teacher talk when one of the main features of teacher talk is questions that the asker already has the answer to. The classic example of this is someone saying, "What time is it?" And it's 6:57, and the response being very good. Like, "What time is it?" 6:57. Oh, very good. You know how to tell the time. Those are questions we already have access to the answers, or we already know the answers to. If you have a bunch of availability and there's a bunch of demand for school, you don't need to become the teacher who already has the answer. Be a learner and ask real questions of your child, of whatever age. These could be questions that are about what your child is thinking, what your child is understanding, how your child has already thought about this problem, how your child's feeling, that your child thinks you ought to do next. I say child, what I should say is learner, because I want to think about not just small children, but all children, our children. And then when you get an answer, listen, and really listen. This is a great painting. It's called Listening to Birds. And it just captures it beautifully. So number 3, ask real questions and listen. Then finally, this is one that's sometimes can be a little bit provocative, and that is quit saying good job. This is something we do all the time as parents. I recognize that it's controversial. I also recognize it's a deeply ingrained habit. There are alternatives to saying good job. Why not say good job? Good job puts us in a position as the evaluator of our children, and our children as the evaluated by us. So I don't mean to be quite so inflammatory about don't say good job, but ever. What I mean is think about alternatives to saying good job. Here's a few. How did you get that answer? Or how did you get that? What are you thinking about? Again, what do you think we should do next? Or what do you think you should do next? Why did you do it the way you did it? And my favorite is when your child goes to show you something and you have this impulse to say good job, just try saying, I see. When your child says, look, try to say, yes, I see, and see what happens next. There's a lot of interesting things that can happen when we disrupt the habit of the good job. The last thing I'll say about that is the reasons my undergraduate students give for saying good job is that children need praise to be motivated. My own experience and tons of research doesn't bear this out. It's not that praise is unimportant, but the children are motivated by really good, interesting problems, and our praise isn't always required. I think I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop my share. I have a bunch of, I do have other slides ready, but we were able to get through 2 quadrants. They're both of which I was excited about. So let's stop share.
Y
I think
quiero terminarlo ahora para dejarle tiempo para las preguntas y respuestas.
So there's a question. We're in Q&A now. If I understand, if you got to leave, it took about 35 minutes of my own talk.
Estamos en,
but I'm going to go ahead and go to the
estamos
Q&A.
en la sección. Si ustedes tienen que de preguntas y respuestas, si ustedes
You're
tienen
welcome
que irse,
to go to the Q&A
tienen la
tab on the
posibilidad,
bottom.
obviamente, de irse, y gracias por estar con nosotros. Si no,
So my Spanish language interpreters, I'm hearing your voice again, which is fine, but I just didn't know if you knew that I'm hearing the Spanish interpretation of my own talk. So question from Marge: how do you encourage, facilitate participation and completion of non-preferred schoolwork in a high demand, low availability situation when delegating and the timer are not enough? It's a really marvelous question. I think in the first place, it's a little bit of it's a gentle indictment of school, but it's also a clear recognition that there are a lot of other things our children, can be involved with that aren't the school work. I do want to make a distinction. I think there's sometimes where schoolwork is just a drag, and other times where schoolwork is really where the work that's required to do the schoolwork. Sometimes it can be just a drag. Other times it can be really threatening in a way. So those are 2 different situations. I'm going to talk about the times when school work is just a drag, which is different, I think, than when the work involved in doing schoolwork feels like a threat to one's esteem or yeah, sort of image of oneself. And that's possible. In fact, it's not that uncommon, where doing schoolwork feels risky even when nobody's watching, because of the experience of feeling dumb or feeling stupid or feeling whatever. My own son grapples with that. He seems perfectly capable to me, but sometimes doing schoolwork is he anticipates the frustration, and to him that frustration feels like a sign, or a sign from the universe that he's incompetent or he's stupid. I hope we're not contributing to that. In any case, when school's a drag, right? So what does happen when school's a drag? Not when school's scary. When school's a drag, this happens. In one of these, quadrant number 3, I mentioned some of the stuff. We didn't get to quadrant number 3. One way to do it is, one way to approach it is to think about, I talk about imagining forward. Bear with me on this. So sometimes a way through the stuff that's a drag, actually, this has been pretty effective with my own kids and my own life with them, is to imagine the other side of that work. And it's not just how are you going to feel, but it's a little more, I hope you understand what I'm saying. It's not just you're going to feel good when you finish, which is so easy to say. It's rather encouraging a learner to make a promise to him or herself or themselves, which means, in my case, it feels like hard language. I'm a little nervous to share it, but it says, when you go to bed at night, what story do you want to tell yourself about your day, about what you were able to accomplish? And then when I check in, that means that and then I have them share that with me. So there's some other stuff in some of the other quadrants about journaling some of this, really getting themselves down on paper to say, where do you want to be at the end of the day today? What's going to count as a good day's work? And then you can be that makes it a promise to themselves rather than a thing that you need to enforce, but you can be a reminder and just say, hey, there's this promise to yourself. So that's the most complicated. There's more to say about that. There's something else is, we've had to, of course, drop the hammer ourselves from time to time. And by that, I mean just saying, look, you don't get to do the things that you want to do until you do the things you have to do. Let me say that again. You don't get to do the things you want to do until you do the things you have to do. So it's like, well, I'm talking about chores. I'm gonna do my chores later. Well, okay, but then you can't do whatever it is that you want to do. I'm thinking of Legos or TikTok's a big deal, right? So you can't do any TikToks until you're done with it. That means we have to enforce, and which is hard when we don't have a lot of availability. But I feel like some of that can be accomplished by periodic check-ins. I guess overall, I want us to avoid going to war with our kids, and rather to help our children of any age learn to make promises to themselves and to get that good feeling of having fulfilled that promise to oneself. So, Marge, that's probably not enough. Really what I want to do is go somewhere and buy a cup of coffee and learn more about what you're thinking about so that I can learn from you, but that's my initial response. I hear Joe Cook says, how does Pomodoro vary for younger ages? K through 3, I can't imagine my second grader managing a schedule such as what you displayed independently. Any suggestions on how to scaffold Pomodoro to work up to it? Actually, yes, I have a third grader and he is a Pomodoro fanatic. I don't think he's advanced. He's young, actually, a little bit young for third grade. First of all, it's the Pomodoro technique. Pomodoro was named by an Italian fella who invented the Pomodoro technique, and he was using a kitchen timer, and the kitchen timer was shaped like a tomato. I don't speak Italian, but the history is that Pomodoro was named for a tomato, and so it was a kitchen timer shaped like a tomato. I believe you that I agree with you that it's difficult to imagine a second grader managing a schedule. Remember that in quadrant number 4, we talked about planning and checking in. So in the first place, that planning I can share that slide, but it was the whiteboard with the day scheduled out. That took us about 10, 15 minutes to do this not this morning, whatever morning it was we did it. It took us about 10 or 15 minutes. It wasn't friendly, it wasn't unfriendly, but it was very matter of fact. And involved me asking my son, what do you think you're going to be able to get done? And when he said everything, I'd say, nah, it's not realistic. Let's talk through this about what we're going to be able to get done. So setting the schedule or setting the plan is not something I would ever expect my own kid, my 8-year-old, to do on his own. But once that schedule is in place, my 8-year-old is very well capable of managing a kitchen timer. And it sounds so simple that it can't possibly work. But it does. And again, I don't have I'm not talking about a kindergartner, but there's something about you'll be focusing on your work for this amount of time, and here's the timer, and here's your work, and there's not other things to do. Now, if your child needs extra assistance, then you're also having to make available other ways of getting assistance, or helping your child to say, all right, if you come stuck, then go on to the next thing. And when I am available, or when I can make somebody available, we can come back to the next thing. So part of the Pomodoro technique that I didn't make clear today, or I didn't spend a bunch of time on today, is that it's not just about, right, of course, it's not just about organizing your time by timer and by focus, but it's also about setting it up so that the work is available for you. I am going to share one slide, if you don't mind. Well, whether or not you mind, I'm going to share one slide because I love the slide. It's this one, and it says, make it easy to start. So when you have Pomodoro technique or not, every ounce of energy that you spend, or our children spend, our learners spend, getting ready to do work, makes it less likely and less enjoyable, less easy to get into the work. So the image here, I want to talk about this image. If you want to start running as a regular habit, running is not that much fun for a lot of people. A lot of people do it, but if you're just trying to get started on this, or you want to make it a habit, it's not yet a habit, you want to make it a habit. Similarly, you want your child to be focused during a Pomodoro or during the time they have. Make it easy to start. And why running shoes? Because if you have your running shoes untied, socks ready, next to your bed, it is and the science is super clear on this. It is significantly more likely that you will go for a run than if you have to go to your closet or go to your shoebox and get the shoes and untie them and find the socks and do everything else. How does that relate? I'm going to stop sharing. How does that relate to the Pomodoro technique? Well, I think that a lot of times and I found this trying to work this out with my own kids. When we think, we get them set up with a time, but then it's just not easy for them to get started on the work. They have to organize their work or find it or whatever. So, but if you have things in the order in which they are, and you spend that initial time planning ahead, then I think the Pomodoros go easy. I'm feeling self-conscious, I have to confess, because this Q&A makes it seem like I'm going to have big solutions. I want you to know that what I'm thinking about is research that I know, orienting ideas that I'm operating with, but also my own experience as a parent. So what's not happening here is the back and forth that would say, man, where I would say, what do you think? And does that make sense? What are you facing, et cetera? So Joe, that's the initial thing. I hope we get a chance to talk more about it. Linda says, I'm raising 4 grandchildren. Thank you. And I'm getting a lot of pushback. I'm also working remotely for Santa Barbara County Education Office, and I'm finding it hard to get them on schedules that work together. Yes. Yes. This was that thing that wasn't fully captured, having children at different ages, and the fact that we're often outnumbered, right? We're outnumbered by the number of kids we have. We have 4. I've got 3. But also, if they start having different kinds of needs, and they're coming to us with different needs and different problems, it can be almost impossible. I want to say, Linda, your situation is probably near impossible. I want to talk a little bit about the pushback. I just want to make a nod toward it and say it's worth, remember I started out saying children make sense or kids make sense. It's worth trying to figure out by asking real questions and listening, trying to figure out what the pushback's about. I had an amazing conversation. I'm so proud of my son. It was a super difficult conversation this morning where he just did not want to do any of this work. And we'd had the plan and he had the timer, and man, it's just like he looked like he would rather have been any place else. And I took it personally, like, man, what did I do something wrong? What's going on, man? Some of this feels like true confessions. I said, look, I don't feel okay. I don't know if I said even this nice. I don't feel okay. You're not going to go do your work when it's this tense and this. You're upset. I can't figure out why. You're not telling me why. And it was leave me alone. And I said, well, I can't leave you alone. I'm your dad. I'm not going to leave you alone. I'm your dad. So we're going to sit here and I'm going to do work. And when you're ready, you're going to tell me. And after about 20 minutes, it was hard. He's crying really hard. He started to quiet down and he turned to me and he said, I'm angry because I feel stupid, and I'm angry because I feel really anxious. Honestly, he said this. I feel really anxious. I feel like there's too much to do, and I don't know how to do it. And I was like, man, I thought, I confessed to you, my colleagues and fellow parents, I thought he was just being bratty because he was tired. It was real stuff, and I said, okay, something along the lines of, all right, but we've got to get to it. So let's go and let's figure out what you're going to work on first. So my point here is that the pushback, I tend to at first take it personally, but the pushback might not be about us. The pushback, and I'm telling you, Linda, I often feel like it's the pushback's on me, and my own personality, I tend to push harder, like stand my ground or something. But it's worth spending the time first. What's the pushback? And not being satisfied, I should say that asking real questions and then listening. Listening also means not being satisfied with the first answer. So if a child says, I'm bored, maybe, let's see if there's not more to it. Now, as far as managing multiple children, I think we're all figuring that out. And a lot of it, in my case, I don't know that I have a technique for it, except find other adults or something. One technique could be recruiting the older children to be not teachers that can generate animosity, but recruiting older children to be partners with you and trying to make your family a healthier place for living and learning, and be really clear about that. I guess when I'm really stuck, when I'm really stuck or feeling lost, and I'm also at my best, which is definitely not all the time, just being honest with my own kids and saying, I'm lost. I don't know how to do this. I need your help in figuring out how to do this. I'm committed to what I'm committed to. We're still going to do your schoolwork, but I can't figure out how to do it. And sometimes inviting children in, I find that the learners and children who are learners in our family are often, when invited in a genuine way, can often describe their sense making pretty well. Okay, I don't see any other questions, but there are some things that I'm seeing in the chat, a couple of private things. If you have looks like they're coming straight from Kelly. If you have low availability, what are your tips for kids who are not motivated to do their work? I gotcha. Here's an answer. Bear with me. It's going to take a couple of minutes. I see some faces coming back, John. I'm wondering if that means we got to cut time short. Let me say first, I want to give you a way to think about motivation, which is different than the way we often think about it. I have some resources on this. John and others, I hope you remind me. Kelly and others, I hope you remind me to go dig up some of those resources and share it with the participants today about motivation. There's some nice research that helps us rethink motivation. But a way I want to start is to say, motivation, we often use motivation to talk about desire or interest, right? Which feels more like emotional states than what motivation really is. So bear with me. The root word of motivation is motive, which shares the same, it's the same root we use for motor and automotive, which means really motive, the motive part of motivation means movement. So one answer to tip for kids who are not motivated is to first think of motivation as movement, and then to apply classic laws of physics, the law of inertia. Things that are not in motion will resist getting into motion. Things that are moving will want to stay moving. Physicists in this group, please don't hold me accountable for the wording. So if the problem with motivation is often getting moving, not necessarily generating interest, but getting moving, in which case my tip is the same as always, which is, it's the tip, not forget our kids, is a tip for myself as well, which I call the 2-minute rule, right? Which is that when I'm not motivated to do something that I know I got to do, give it 2 minutes. And the reason that works, when it works, and it works a lot more often than you might imagine, getting moving. If you spend 2 minutes doing something, you get moving. And once you're moving, I find that a lot of the things we think are problems with motivation at least diminish or disappear. Not all of them. We still need to keeping moving, but it's a different thing than treating it as interest, which is, we often try to convince our kids to be motivated by trying to convince them how valuable something is. That seems to me to be the wrong treatment for the problem of motivation. There's a bunch of stuff our kids are having to do in school that we're having to do at work that we just don't want to do. But as adults, what we've learned is that doing things we don't want to do is part of the deal. If that's all we're doing, that's a lifestyle issue, life choice issue. So one of the things we can help our children do is learn how to get into the stuff we just don't want to do. So the one answer to that, Kelly, I'll see it in the chat, is first acknowledge, man, sometimes things are no fun. So what do? You get started, right? You get moving to keep moving, right? Autumn says in the Q&A, I think that with multiple children, one answer can be time slots. Nice. Give each child, love that answer. Give each child a time slot where they can be one-on-one with you each day, and give them additional work they can easily do on their own for an additional amount of time. Autumn, you should hand it over to you. It's gorgeous, right? This will be both a feeling of consistency and routine, as well as dependability. I love it. And I want to focus on dependability and especially celebrate that, because dependability is at the root of, is often a building block for one of the most, probably the most essential quality of the kind of relationships that we want for learning and growing and becoming, and that is relationships of trust, right? And being dependable is one, not the only strand, it's not the same thing, but being dependable is one important dimension of trust. John, can you give me a thumbs up? Do we have time? I can go for like 5 or 10 more minutes.
Well, I think what we should do here is probably wrap up, because I want to provide some last second closing thoughts and give people an ideas of how we can keep this conversation going after the webinar, because I think the durability of this conversation might be important than the finishing it right now.
Great. Can I just, and I'll try one more answer. Is that okay?
Sure.
Sure. And that is, my boys, this is my boys are 12 and 14 and impossible to get up in the morning. They'd sleep till 12 if we let them. It takes several prompts to get them up by their 9:30 Zooms, and then they do it from bed. Any advice?
¿Tienen las juntas de Zoom?
Okay, so I'm hearing the Spanish again, which is okay, but just letting you know. So, I anticipated this question, and I went on Google and went and looked around a little bit, and it confirmed some of the things that have worked in my family, and that, you know, I've talked about with parents, and also that's in the research. One of the things is to spend the time, give some authority. I think our children can handle some more authority for thinking about what's next, thinking about organizing their time. And what that can mean is before they go to bed, they plan the first hour of their day with the assumption that it's before noon. So give them a way to foresee. Look, if I don't know what I'm going to, I think a lot of us can, empathize. When we don't know what we're going to do, it's a lot easier to just stay with whatever you're doing. And if that's being in bed, that's fine. If it's something else, that's also fine. Whatever it is, we tend if we don't know where we're headed or know what's next, we tend to do whatever we're doing. And knowing the night before the way you're going to wake up is one thing. Another, I'm not going to talk about the obvious, which is, no devices after 10 o'clock. There's just really good science that the light that our devices, that it screws with or messes with our circadian rhythms and can prevent us from all kinds of messes with our hormones. And so we're not going to get any good sleep. If you absolutely cannot remove devices, it's worth getting your children some of those blue light blocking glasses, so that if they're going to be on their devices, at least they're not getting that blue light. That's kind of obvious. It's also kind of obvious getting them to bed earlier can often help, which is kind of sometimes slow in coming. But in any case, plan the night before. The other thing is a routine in the morning, a really set routine, which starts with making your bed. There's everybody in my family, one of the best things that's happened for us over this COVID-19 time is we all have the same routine no matter what time we get up. And sometimes kids don't get up till 9, sometimes they get up at 7. Sometimes it's not usually too much later, but I think part of that is because we all have the same routine. We get up and we make our bed. That finishes bed, right? You get up, you make your bed, and you drink a glass of water. You lose some crazy amount of water when you sleep at night, and drinking a large glass of water can be a way to rejuvenate yourself. I can't make my children want to get out of bed, but I can certainly give them something that when they wake up, there's something to do. And that kind of routine, it's harder to enforce with some kids than with others. Some kids lean into it really well. But those are the kinds of things that I would try. I'd also recommend, I spent about 45 minutes just messing around, thinking about this question even before the talk, about some things to try. And there's some stuff out there. At the very least, it's worth figuring out why your children, why aren't they getting out of bed, and not accepting the answer because it's more comfortable in bed. So, and maybe I'll just close with this by saying, it sounds a little preachy, but I'll take the risk. Our children are going through hard stuff too. This is really hard for them. It's hard for all of us. And I got 3 kids who experience the hard part of this, of the changes in our lives from COVID-19 in very different ways. They suffer. One child suffers silently, another child suffers dramatically, another child suffers angrily. But they're all suffering about different things. They're all grieving. Maybe suffering is not quite right. Our children are all grieving, just like grown-ups grieve. And so the extent to which we can face this with them, I think has the potential for really deepening the relationships we have with our kids. And we can get some understandings we might not have had about what their lives are like. So maybe that's a place to end. I am so disappointed that I didn't get to be in the same physical space with you and feel your bodies move around and see your smiles or frowns or blinks or winks. But I am deeply honored by the time you gave of your lives to me today. So thank you very, very much. John, you or Kelly or anybody, be a fearless leader and tell me what I should do next.
Jason, if you'll just hang around for a second, I think that would be great. What I'd like to do is thank you, Dr. Duque, for your time tonight. We appreciate you sharing your expertise and tips. And
Hunter, sorry, I saw Hunter.
Yeah, and I think this was a really great session. I wish it could go on forever. I'm going to share a few things really quickly.
So, Jason, I would love for you to answer one particular question while we have our interpreters.
Sure.
And so she said, what can I do to motivate my 10-year-old daughter who has a learning disability to study? And it's so powerful.
Can you even see this?
And then I'm going to mute my son, but I do want to show you what he did while we were on this call, which happens to be building a Lego spaceship for
Hang on,
SpaceX.
I'm not seeing the whole thing. Let me see. Oh man, where did you get those pieces?
Oh, I'm building it.
But I've never seen those wing pieces before. I don't have those wing pieces at our house.
So grandparents found those, and he's very excited. I've been helping him while we've been on this call. But thank you. I mean, everything that you have shared from a parent of young kids has been so meaningful. And so if you have any suggestions on, you know, a 10-year-old with,
Sure.
Yeah, pop on in.
So the first thing I'll say is, and up to this point in my own life, we've not had, in my family's life, we've not had to address learning disabilities in our own family. And without getting specific, but I will say this, not to say that I know what anybody, particular persons is going through, but I did experience a brain injury in college, which has led to some other issues so I want you to know that we're not having to deal with our children, but I do recognize that there's tremendous diversity in what people are able to handle and when and what shape or form and what they're able to produce, and that varies by context and by situation. So what that means is I'm hearing your question with a lot of ideas in my head, and they include, I want to be very clear. I want you to, whoever's at, where's the questions coming from? I know from having worked with children with disabilities, grappling with my own concerns, that some contexts make a disability more disabling than other contexts. And plenty of people who grapple with learning differences or who are working through learning disabilities are able to function perfectly well, and in some cases in amazing ways, in different contexts. So how do you, that's a long background, but it's important that I get that out. You probably, if you're a parent or a grandparent of, or a family member of someone with disabilities, you probably already know, but I want to say it, and is that please don't be afraid to insist on your own educational rights at the same time that you're understanding about everybody's limitations in this time of emergency remote teaching. So what that means is that the schools have an obligation, yes, to meet the education, to help you meet the educational needs of your child. So this was an almost impossibly sudden and impossibly disrupting weeks and months. I don't think it's going to be like this again. But moving forward, I think it's fair to begin to assert your child's rights to the quality education, the equal education that your child has a right to. As for motivation, here's some, gosh, I'm trying to think quickly in a way that doesn't take up a ton, like another hour of conversation. I'm trying not to look at my screen too much because I really want to be talking to Hunter, who's Kelly's child with the Legos. Hunter, we're going to talk in a minute. Let me think through this. Let me say that in a lot of my work, I do a lot of research looking really carefully at videos of children and adults doing things together. So when I talk about being interested in social relations, I'm interested in how those look, how those are stitched together in real time. And one thing's become really clear. I don't know, in hundreds, thousands of hours of video, it's hard for me, if I look long enough, to find to be able to really sustain a claim that a child is unmotivated. I'm not disputing this, but I'm clarifying it. So children are often not motivated to do what we want them to do, but they're motivated to do something else. Kids don't want to sit still and do nothing. They want to go do stuff. Sometimes that means they go, in the absence of anything else, they go cause trouble. But that's something. So be sure you don't let yourself be alone. Obviously, but then find what is motivating to your 10-year-old child. If it's Legos, cool. If it's TikToks on the phone, cool. If it's, hours and hours spent on TikTok, maybe not. But figure out what it is that, remember, motivation is movement. What gets your child moving? What gets your child moving? What does your child move toward? What does your child move into? What kinds of situations do you see your child of any age, of any set of abilities? What do you see your child taking a step forward to? When do you see your child taking a step back? I feel like too often, as a parent, as a researcher, I'm not a good enough student myself of my own child's experience. But figuring out what does motivate them, where motivation is moving, what gets them moving, and then this may sound a little bit manipulative, but I think it's fair, given that we all have to do things we don't want to do. Finding the right time to say, when they're moving, to say, I see you are totally into this. That's cool. That's great. But you got to do this other stuff first. Sometimes can be enough to get them moving into the stuff that they don't really want to do, in a way that at least lets them finish it. So to sum up, it's a marvelous question, and it deserves a more careful response than I'm able to give in this time. But in sum, your child is motivated. Something motivates your child. Something gets your kid moving. Be a student of that first, right? Your child makes sense. Figure out your child's motivated. Figure out what's your child moving, and then the way I say it sometimes to my students, get your child moving and then get in the way, right? Get your child moving and then put something there that is sort of on their path, that they're going to have to climb over or move through or knock down in order to do whatever it is they want to do. There's some work, some really interesting, sometimes controversial, but evidence-based research that shows the work of pivotal response therapy, for example, with children with autism. I don't know what kind of disability you're talking about, and that's outside of my wheelhouse, or outside of what I know a ton about. But some of that is, as I understand it, is largely about getting kids moving into something and then getting in their way and saying, you got to do this first. Many thanks. I think I'm done. Don't ask me to do more, because I'll keep going.
Jason, at this time, I think we should probably try and bookend the conversation. I want to share a few things and let people know how to stay engaged. First of all, Jason, thanks to you. I appreciate you running long, and I appreciate you sharing everything that you shared. Really was wonderful. It felt more than a webinar. It felt human, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Everybody else out there, I appreciate your comments and your questions and your participation in this and hanging in there with us. I want to just close with a few thoughts. This webinar was recorded. We are going to post it so it can be revisited on the Gevirtz School website and our YouTube channel. We will, I think we've already dropped those links into the chat. We will also email them to you. We will be sending a follow-up email in the next few days to share some of the recommendations and resources that Dr. Duque mentioned. So keep your eyes on your inbox. We will be doing some social media follow-up posts about this webinar. That would be a really good place for folks to ask questions, because we monitor it closely. And if you don't already follow us on social media, we'll drop those links in the chat and email those to you as well. It's a very good place. And I want to say, if you have questions for somebody specific at the Gevirtz School, you can find all of our contact information on the Gevirtz School website. It's all there. It's all organized well. It's easy to find. And we do that because we want to hear from you. So we'll share that link soon. Also, as what I'm about to share will make clear, we do have a few more webinars coming up. If you have registered for this webinar, you are already registered for the others. Please mark the dates. Please put it on your calendars. We would love to see you.